and welcome. We are so glad to have you with us today. We are going to dive right into a topic about 10 types of toxic people that you want to avoid in your marriage, in your family, and honestly, just in life in general.
Come on.
Yeah. Now, today we're going to hit on those first 5, and then next week we'll follow it up with another episode about the other 5. But toxic people are those people who keep you from your God-given purpose. So we need to know who they are and how to engage with them.
Yeah, that's really good. Now, I do want to point out that eliminating toxic people altogether probably isn't super realistic, but I do think that we can minimize their impact. Even Jesus walked with Judas for a period of time. He was amongst the 12 disciples. Obviously, Judas would betray Jesus. And so you might think, why would Jesus spend 3 years with Judas? Well, I think it is important, though, to denote that he didn't let him into his inner circle. That was
Right.
Peter, James, and John. So there was a limit to where he let Judas have access. And it wasn't based on Jesus's willingness, but it was based on Judas's unwillingness to change. And sometimes we have to put limits on people because they're just not willing or ready to be in a relationship.
That's good. Yeah, Proverbs 13:20 says, "Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm." So it's obvious that the people that we let into our lives really do affect the way we think. Completely eliminating toxic people, though, might not be realistic depending on your situation. It might be a coworker or a family member, someone in your community, maybe even somebody in your church. But yes, you could change jobs. You could not see that family member. You could move homes, maybe change churches. But the point is that these people are everywhere, and utopia just doesn't exist. So if we're being really honest, we might even fall into these categories from time to time.
Yeah, I know, harsh truth right there,
Right?
right? Get hit in the face a little bit. But before we jump into today's list, let's talk about what we mean by toxic, because I think that word gets thrown out a lot, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So for the sake of our discussion, we're going to identify toxic people as those who pull you away from God by weakening or infecting your mind, your heart, your soul, your body. So in any of those ways, those could be toxic people. These are people that bring you down, they wear you out. Toxic people pollute you, both you and your environment.
Yeah, and as a couple or a family, it's also important to realize that we have a responsibility to not only care for ourselves, but to care for those that God's entrusted us with. So we want to be considerate of them as well. And just because somebody doesn't affect you or maybe bother you personally, it doesn't mean that they won't have a negative influence on your spouse or your children.
That's good.
Yeah, so we hear spouses say this often, "I don't see the big deal," when their spouse is bothered by something. Well, that's an issue because when you're married, it is a big deal. If it's a big deal to your spouse, it should be a big deal to you as well. In Proverbs 12:26 says, "The righteous choose their friends carefully, but the way of the wicked leads them astray."
Yeah, and I think it's also important to remember that toxic people are often toxic because they're unhealthy. They have unresolved issues in their life. So you may want to avoid them, that's true, but we also want to be bold enough to continue to love them. And I know that's really, really difficult at times, but hate towards them is not going to make your situation better. In fact, it's only going to hurt you in the long run. But love, the Bible says, actually has the power to cover a multitude of sins. And so I think that's great context to really be aware of as we're talking through this. And maybe we talk about avoiding people or cutting them out of your life. We're not saying hate them, destroy them, lash back out at them. We're not saying any of those things. We want to love so that we can make a meaningful impact, hopefully on them, but also on maybe the people that are in our lives currently as well.
Yeah. However, this doesn't mean that we do it haphazardly. Just as you have to take precautions removing toxic waste from the environment, we also have to tread cautiously if we're going to try to deal with toxic people. While we may want to help them, it's only possible if they have a willingness to receive it. And that's really important. Otherwise, we're going to be impacted negatively by that exchange.
Yeah. And so really remember that, because some of you extra compassionate people out there who have hearts unlike me might struggle with this one. So hopefully this will be a help to you. Our hope is to help you recognize toxic environments so that you can take appropriate actions to either remove yourself from the situation, maybe cut them out of the situation, or at least mitigate the level of access that they have to you or to your marriage or to your family. And at the end, we'll give you some tips for you to be able to do this next week. But we're going to start by jumping into into the first 5 types of toxic people today before we get into our last list of 5 next week. So let's start with the manipulator, right? Manipulation is about motive. And now there's many different types of manipulation though, and I think that's important to point out. There are those who are seemingly helpful to you until you realize they just wanted to get something in return, and that's the only reason they were actually helping you out. But there's other types as well.
Right. Another version is the person who uses guilt to get you to do what they want or to get their own way. Or you might be dealing with an abusive manipulator, someone who uses fear or even gaslighting to trick you into believing a false alternate reality of their own creation. But manipulators are masters at finding and using leverage to get you to do what they want. With manipulative people, you have to be willing to state consequences, and you have to have a willingness to follow through on those consequences.
Yeah, the follow through is really important. We know a couple, and the husband really is a master manipulator, and fortunately he has a drinking problem, he has an anger problem, and so something will inevitably happen and a situation will arise. She'll remove herself, take the kids away, and say, hey, I'm not coming back until you do X, Y, and Z. And, he'll apologize, be, just super, I'm sorry, all these types of things. And then eventually what ends up happening is he maybe takes a few small steps, but she comes back too soon.
Yeah.
And what do you think happens? He reverts right back to his old ways because he knows there's no consequence. And so we have to have that consequence. Otherwise, they're going to just continue to take advantage of us.
Yeah, because manipulative people are so good at convincing you that they'll change. You have to be willing to make them prove it to you, though, before you re-engage in that relationship. And the next type of person we want to talk about is the judge. And the judge, they're the one who's always watching, always waiting to tell you what you did wrong. They're really quick with statements without asking clarifying questions. They don't seek to understand. They just share their disapproval at every opportunity. Judgmental people consistently make you feel worse through the statements and the actions that they use.
Yeah, and we're in the church world, and you would like to think that because we're in the church world, we'd be filled with love and grace and kindness and all that good stuff. But sometimes, believe it or not, in church, there are some judgy people that are around. I remember one instance of someone, they were celebrating 1 year of being sober, and God had just been doing some amazing things in this person's life. And in celebration, they decided they're going to get a tattoo. And so they had a big tattoo on their back, and they posted a picture online. I think it was of a cross or something like that. And somebody in the comments on social media got on there, and they're like, really love you, but not supportive of the tattoo. And I was like, what? Why? What was the purpose of saying that? Was that helpful? Was it beneficial? Was it encouraging? And are they going to do the tattoo is permanent? Come on, people. What are you going to do at this point? I think it's pretty much done. So the judge is just really there to show their disapproval, and that's going to create a lot of problems and a lot of toxicity.
Yeah, but judgmental people are everywhere. And unfortunately, even though the motive may not be bad, judgmental people often cast a shadow of blame on others. And it's also important to remember the teaching of Jesus where he warns us about focusing on the speck in somebody else's eye and completely ignoring the giant plank in our own eye.
Come on now.
Right? When dealing with judgmental people, you may not always have to cut them completely out of your life, but you will need to restrict access to anything important. If possible, be civil. Definitely be civil, but don't share your dreams and desires with them. They haven't proven that they deserve that.
Yeah, that's a good word for somebody right there. When it comes to toxic people, let's talk about the next one. This is the victim, right? When we say the victim, we don't mean legitimate victims. We're not talking about that, but those who have a victim mindset, they always play the victim, if you will. Yeah. Because with the victim, they see the world conspiring against them. They're a victim of their circumstances or their environment or whatever else is happening. Nothing is ever their fault. They can do no wrong. They have no level of responsibility. They have absolutely zero accountability. They love wallowing in self-pity and consistently blame others for the problems they have, even when it's clearly of their own creation.
Yeah, and these types of people tend to live in the past because that's the reason for their present condition, especially if their past isn't very good. The victim has a negative and fixed mindset. Growth is not possible because they have no control. Victims are toxic because they remove responsibility from the equation. and their propensity to complain will rub off on you and will wear you down. And what's crazy is that there are real victims in the world, yet the real victims, the ones who really have had a difficult past, they seem to often rise above that circumstances and help others instead of constantly pointing out how bad things were for them.
Yeah, I think of a good friend that we have. He has an amazing story. 10 years ago, he was in prison, and I think he could have made a lot of excuses. His mom had a drug problem. He ended up getting hooked on drugs. Obviously, when you're on drugs, you're not making the wise decisions. He didn't make good decisions. And so he ended up stealing a car, got caught, thrown in prison. And so instead of, blaming everyone else for his situation, blaming everyone else for why he was there, he decided to take that time to really rise up and become a leader and take some responsibility. And when he got out of prison, he got a job. He worked his butt off. He worked hard. And now he's the owner of a business and has a great family. He serves in the church. He's absolutely amazing, faithful, just has such gratitude for a life and an encourager to the people who are around them. But he chose not to be the victim, even though he probably had the right to in a lot of ways. At least society would have told him to. And I want you to know, when you choose not to have the victim mindset, when you choose to be growth-oriented, have that growth mindset, God will bless you beyond measure, just like he did for our friend.
Yeah, that's so powerful. When it comes to dealing with someone stuck in a victim mindset, the easy thing is to agree with them just so you can move on. But instead, we want to let them know that they are seen and heard while simultaneously speaking words of truth and life to them. The Bible says that life and death are in the power of the tongue, and we want to bring biblical encouragement into their difficult situation. We must also be mindful that we're not responsible for what happens to us, but we are 100% responsible for our response to that.
Yes.
The truth is, some people do have the deck stacked against them more than others, but that doesn't mean that it's insurmountable. And on the other hand, it doesn't mean that we don't work really hard to reshuffle the deck to create a more fair world for the people around us.
Yeah, and that last part I think is so important, because sometimes we say, well, this is just the way the world is. Well, we want to make the world a better place. That's what we believe God's placed us here to do. And so we want to speak life, and we want to speak, truth and hope and bring healing to people's lives. Yeah. That's a really good word. So let's talk about the next toxic person on our list, and that's the gossip. Gossipers thrive on good old information. What's on the DL, what's the latest. They want to know all the news. They're obsessed with other people's business, but they rarely give you any information on themselves. They got a hot take on every rumor and everything, whether it's true or accurate or not. Gossips are absolutely toxic because they can't control themselves. They have zero self-control. They have an insatiable lust for more news, and if they can't find it, they might just make it up, right? Proverbs 16:28 says, "A dishonest man spreads strife, and a whisper separates close friends."
Yeah, and gossipers may or may not intend to hurt others, but one thing is for sure, they really just can't help themselves. They often live on a steady diet of social media, with maybe a side of TMZ thrown in here or there. But one of the greatest ironies of gossipers is that they're often blind to their ways. They don't really understand that that's what they're doing. We've seen plenty of gossips over the years, and it's funny to me that they think that the people that they're gossiping with are not gossiping about them when their back is turned.
Exactly. It's so true, because that's happening. And I'll be honest with you, when I'm dealing with a gossiper, I take a very direct approach. I've always done this. Yeah. If they want to bring something to me and say, hey, did you hear about so-and-so, or did you hear about this thing? I'll be like, well, did you talk to them about that? In fact, why don't we go talk to them right now? You know what's crazy when you do that? People stop bringing gossip to you. It just shuts it down. They're like, I'll go find somebody else to gossip with. And when it comes to dealing with gossip, you have to realize you're dealing with an unhealthy person. That's why, because often they want to focus on others and their problems so they don't have to deal with themselves. Right. But to protect yourself, you need to, again, establish boundaries, or maybe even cut off certain lines of communication, certainly, because what you don't want to do is give them ammunition that they're going to use and take it against you, or they're going to twist your words, take them out of context, and that's going to become a bigger issue or a bigger problem. Right. We may not be able to stop a person from gossiping altogether, but we also don't have to engage them in the game. We don't have to be a part of it.
Right. Well, let's wrap up our first 5 toxic people. We want to talk about the social media attention seeker.
Yes.
We all know this person. They're in our feed. Anytime their stuff pops up, we're like, oh, here we go again. But this is the one that makes purposely vague comments, hoping that you're going to take the bait and ask what's going on. They'll say things like, oh, I'm not sure what to do now. Or I don't know how much more of this I can take, or will I ever catch a break? They have the woe is me tone, and they never provide context. They really just want you to ask. So here's why this one is toxic, though, because they suck people into their pitiful situation. And instead of just coming out and sharing openly about what's going on and what they're struggling with, they make people play their game. And if you don't bite, then they move on. You move from manipulation into being the victim, both of which we've discussed today.
Yeah, you really see that. Like if you don't say, well, nobody asks me, nobody cares about me, like it's just a whole game they're playing.
Right.
With someone like this, they're simply looking for attention. They love drama, even though they'll probably tell you, I don't like drama. I don't like drama. Yeah, you love drama, all right? If you want to avoid entering a potentially toxic situation with this type of person, you want to ignore their comments. Let me say this one more time. You want to ignore their comments, not make a comment. Don't engage. Right. Refuse the temptation. I know I have written so many comments and then just deleted them. Sometimes that's helpful, all right? Just get it all out there and then just delete it. Let it go, all right? But that's the best thing you can do, because engagement is what fuels them, and even a negative engagement comment is going to fuel them. Yeah. Full disclosure, the social media attention seeker is one of the toxic people that will absolutely exhaust me and make me lose my mind. Like I can't deal with it. So not only will I not engage, but I will take the liberty to simply mute that person. Like I will just put them on pause for a little while so I don't have to hear from them. It might be a few days, it might be a few weeks, it might be indefinite. And if it's really, really bad, like I will just go to simply unfollow or unfriend you. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I'm barely even on certain social medias because I just can't take the drama. It's too much for me. We got 5 kids. We've been married 20 years. Like I got my own issues. I don't need other people's issues. Like you go take your issues somewhere else because I don't got time for all that noise.
Right. So there you have it. The first 5 of our 10 toxic people you want to avoid list. So on next Tuesday's podcast, we'll drop our final 5. But we would love to hear from you. Are you dealing with some of the toxic people on this list? Or are there some that we didn't include that you would maybe want us to hit on at some point? Drop us a comment. Hit us up on Instagram at Life with 5 Podcast. And of course, if you got anything useful out of this episode, we would love it if you would hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe and tap on that bell so that you'll be notified of future episodes. And hey, thank you so much to those of you who are listening, who are sharing the episodes with your friends and family. That really does help us to be able to infuse faith into more families and marriages. But thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next week for part 2.